is sacred, right? And you need to remember that, because there'll be moments where that is tested, where you're up against the police, where you're up against, the people who are gonna, give you that backlash. And who has the power to give you what you want? I think that's really important, because you need to know who you're taking that paper that that has that list of demands. Who are you calling? And who are you curating your message for? I think that's also really, really important. And the language, there's a language in getting the public to listen and to make the personal political. So I think some of the most successful movements have used arts and the creative arts. So getting the arts on board is also what gives power to what a social movement wants to say. And so how do you generate funds for your movement? So during my time in a lot of movements, how we would look at what networks we already have, and how we can access that, and people who are already doing the work, how we can advance their work through our social movement, or through the demands of our social movement. So also, how can we make our work enjoyable? I think being an activist is really rewarding. There are times where you can look at the idea and what has taken place, and you didn't realize that that place would look like that. I think that's also the spiritual side of me being an activist. You see the idea, but you just don't know the steps that will come before getting there. And when you're there, it's part of a larger picture that's called freedom. And so, our ancestors were chipping away at parts of colonialism. And so we're also chipping away at those parts. And so our generation needs to know what ours looks like. And that's very exciting. That knowing that purpose for your generation is really exciting. And then lastly, how would you ensure change through social movements? So change really requires strong leadership. It requires good messaging. It requires knowing how to deal with backlash, repression. Also knowing that you need to make sure that you are well and healed as you are doing this. So self-care and collective care are so essential. They're actually integral principles in social movements. And so that's how my practice came about, like knowing that spirit has to be okay as I do the work. So even my candle, I needed it because it actually lit up this conversation. And so the last few minutes are just going to be Q&A. That's the message that I had, but I know there are many messages, and that's what connects us as Africans. So I'd love to hear. Mm-hmm.
All right, but I think that there are a few questions in the chat. Have you been able to go through those, or should we, or would you like me to read them out to you?
Can you read them out to me? Because
I definitely will.
Yeah, and I had said we would do that.
Fantastic. And what I will say as we move towards Q&A is to say, thank you so much for everything that you shared with us. I think that there are so many different strands that I would want to pick up on. First of all, I loved your focus on really making sure that we are well grounded in the history of African female activism. I think oftentimes we think that activism is new, but I think that as you'd shown us, there are so many different movements that have actually driven change. And so I thank you so much for bringing that to the fore. I also thank you very much for mentioning the importance of really being able to ground yourself in the right sort of transformational and intersectional and caring leadership. We always forget the importance of caring, empathy, and sympathy in leaders. And so it's great that you focused on how it is important for us to abide by all of that. And then I think that the third thing that I think was great to pick up on was really thinking about how we can use technology to better leverage social movements. And so those are some of the things that really spoke to me. And what I'm going to do is kind of go through each of the questions now.
Okay.
So the first one is from Ifoma. Ifoma, thank you so much for this. And she asked, how do you handle the pushback that you get from religious institutions?
They're very powerful, religious institutions. And I would say in times where they actually need to, draw on scripture that's actually really progressive. The people who are drawing from the scripture choose, the patriarchal option. So I think also as people who are spiritual leaders, as a spiritual healer, I'm a spiritual leader as well. In the circles that you're in, there are people who are made to influence them, and those people need to be doing the work. So I'm sure the person who asked this question is someone who either lives in a place in which religion is very, very influential in the law, or religion is influential in their personal space. Oftentimes your questions, say a bit about you. Or they're in their workspace. Sometimes in politics, the power in politics is rested in the religious institutions. So with that backlash, you need to look at all those levels. So the level of, if it's personal, how do I address it in my personal space? If it's in my workspace, how do I address it there? And then if it's in the law and the actual functioning of the state, then the backlash is it's at different levels. So I want to answer the question, but I wish it was more specific. But what I want to say is, as a spiritual leader, it's important that when I engage with other leaders and in that space, I have to be a voice for, that feminist voice. That's a space for me to agitate. So that for me is how I would answer that.
But I do think you answered the question. It seems that you are saying that the focus when dealing with pushback from religious institutions is to actually think about the ways in which you can interpret the, as you said, scriptures in a more progressive light. I think one thing that you said is that we know that oftentimes a lot of religious texts have been interpreted in an incredibly patriarchal way. We know that oftentimes there is not as much focus on the areas that are more progressive or actually they're more feminist. And I think that, what I would say is that of any faith you are in Nigeria, or even if you're not of any faith at all, whether you're Christian, you're Muslim, going online and actually looking, because there are scholars who work on this. There are scholars who look at the feminist interpretation of the Bible, the feminist interpretation of the Quran. And so I think it would be very, very important to actually spend time reading up on some of those people so that you are also armed with the types of arguments that they use to push back. And so I love that you kind of brought up on that. This is a question of interpretation ultimately.
True. No, you actually can't speak about Africa without speaking about religion, right? Because that's also a way in which colonization came. And so even with the decolonization as a political agenda, that is a layer you must really know, and I know it very personally, and I think my answer was that as a spiritual leader, that is my space to influence. But it's a politic, and it's also a stakeholder to engage with. constantly. I think in a lot of policy consultations, they have to be there. They're there at a high level, they're there at grassroots, they're there, in the family. So yeah, you have to engage with them.
Agreed. Thank you so much for that. Then there was one question of how do you identify people who are genuinely for the cause? And how do you rally them and bring them together to join them into your social movement?
So I think it's really important to also, when you rally, ask people, to what point. We would have conversations in times where we were in occupation for a cause for free education, and we would ask one another, like, would you, if you were asked to leave, the university, would you do it? And then how would you get back? Like, how would you ensure that, what we are asking for is a reality without actually going against, the cause? I think you should rally people and ask them, what space they're in, what they're willing to lose, what they're not willing to lose. Because when things get difficult, you need to know who to call up on, right? And it's not all this, we're not all positioned the same, right? Because that's where positionality is really important. Saying, I'm first generation university educated. It's also a political kind of project to be here. So, I'm willing to lose this and this and this, but not that, right? And so that's really important conversation to be had, when recruiting people.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. And I guess this question is somewhat linked to that, because it asks how you differentiate between activism and political ambition. This is from Chidiebere. And does that matter? I guess maybe the question even would be first, does it matter to differentiate? And if it does, how do you differentiate?
So I think activism is political. And that oftentimes as feminists, that's actually how we enter the political arena, because most institutions, the politic is too radical, so or the deemed too radical. So I think if you're someone of a radical politic and you're trying to enter into political leadership, then why not? I think Stella Nyanzi is doing that, and it's important. It's really important that we're there. And so that political ambition, when you're sitting there, you're advancing African feminist principles. And I mean, for me, doing research for the African Union, I knew at that high level what I'm there to do, and it's to speak the African feminist voice. It's to bring in ideas about regionalism that will shift any patriarchal values that have stayed there for so long. So in a space like that, you're also trying to influence. You don't lose, I don't lose myself in the politic because I'm in that institution. I think also remaining connected to the grassroots while you are in you're pursuing political ambition is really important, because it's about the people. The cause is about the people, and that's how elitism is also maintained. If you're not connected to the people and the cause that got you there, right? So I think activism is political, and then that's what I've just explained is how I live it. The feministing.
Thank you so much for that. And I mean, I guess as a follow-on to that, because I think when people, or when I reread the question, I think that what she's trying to say is that, is there a difference, and should you split between activism and actively running, for example, for political office? And is there a kind of a split between, politicians, and I mean this kind of like people who are running to be, governors, local chairmen, or chairwomen, presidents, et cetera, et cetera. How do you differentiate between those types of people and activists? And does that matter? Is that a meaningful differentiation?
Okay. I think it's quite related, right? But so I would look and see what they do while they're running for political office. So are they like promising things that aren't aligned with feminist principles? Are they not connected? You can also tell when someone is not connected to the cause, right? I feel like we need more women and people who are of ethnicities that are not majority ethnicities in positions of power. So I really think that it's important that feminism is not on the periphery. Let me put it like that.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful. And then I'm just going down. So, okay, there's one question, and sort of two questions, but I'll somewhat combine them into one, is that there is a question as to what do you do if a message might be very controversial or could potentially be misinterpreted? How do you handle this? And I know that someone sent me a private message that was focused, for example, on the issue of abortion, which I do think quite a few, not all feminists, but I do think quite a few focus on and believe is a necessary prerequisite to allow women to really be able to be fully free. But they also do appreciate that in certain places that are particularly religious, that is something that is a very, very controversial topic. And so I think that there is the question as to like, how do you handle these topics that might be very sensitive or might be very controversial?
I remind people of the policies that impact our lives, and I think there've been many women leaders who have been part of thinking through like the Maputo Protocol that really protects that, and so it's also really important that we know things that we have drafted and implemented, and also know what our stance is in terms of abortion, both personal and the state, because sometimes what we think is ours is the state wants us to believe, and I think for me, I've had to think it through with even my spiritual journey as well, that is a baby is an ancestor. So you also have to think of it on that level, and I've had to do that. So I think that's how I would answer that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I think we probably have time for two more questions because we do want to finish on the hour and be respectful of your time. So there's actually someone here who is also from South Africa, and they ask, how do you stay in touch with your country and make a real impact whilst you might be living and working from abroad? I know you mentioned that you'd had some experience with that as well.
Yeah, so I stayed abroad for a year, and during that year, I was trying to connect South African struggles to the struggles not on the continent. So I spent about time in Uganda, and then I would come home and be in South Africa, and I spent a lot of time with feminist activists in Uganda. And my research was looking at, digital feminisms and academic freedom in Uganda. So that's how I remained grounded, that I would be there and I'd get in touch with activists whenever I'm in a country. And also, how do I remain connected to home? I think now I'm also being pushed to connect to home. I'm going back to spaces that I was in as a child. I'm based in Durban. I'm in South Africa, and I'm doing the work. I'm in networks and like grassroots community networks that are working to really think through things like, access to justice and protection orders for abused women and children. I work in a network with this, shelters in the western parts of Durban. So that's also how I remain connected. I stay as a stakeholder in communities that I lived in, or that have some sort of meaning to me and my family. So that's what I do to remain connected to home. But I also understand home to be Africa. So that's also how I try to remain connected.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I know there is one question here from Ugozo who says, how can we make SLA more effective in Nigeria? I mean, I would have turned the question around to you, Ugozo, to let us know what are some of the things you think that could make SLA more effective, or any other types of institutions. But I'm not sure if that was something that you had a perspective on.
Institutions such as?
I believe, Ugozo, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think your question was, how do you make She Leads Africa more effective in Nigeria? I'm not sure if Mba would be best placed.
I'm not best placed to answer that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Mba would be best placed to answer that.
Yeah.
So I think what I would say instead is, perhaps if you have any suggestions or ideas, you please email us at info at sheleadsafrica.org. And we will definitely be sure to review those suggestions and think through how it is we're able to implement them. All right, I will then take on the final question. It is, sorry, give me 1 second. Actually, it seems like it's very connected, because it is someone who's also between the United States and Nigeria. She is seen in Africa as a foreigner, although her father and her husband are Nigerian. And so she was also asking, how can she bridge this divide to get more involved in activism? And I think that you spoke to that a little bit in your last question.
So the question, sorry?
So I believe this is someone who is based between the US and Nigeria. It seems like they have a Nigerian father and husband. However, they are oftentimes seen as a foreigner when they're in Nigeria. And she's somewhat asking, if you're someone who is viewed as a foreigner in a specific country, what are ways in which you can get involved in activism?
Okay. By connecting it to your own, and trying to understand how to be an ally to their struggle, to amplify their struggle and be a co-conspirator, a co-dreamer in their dream for society. So yeah, that's how I would answer that.
Fantastic. And then I think a final question would be, for people who would like to stay connected with you and connected with the work that you do, what is the best way that they can, follow up, either through social media, if there are any organizations that they should follow to keep in touch with your work?
Yeah, sure. So the shelter that I work with in the west of Durban, Ngwandengezi Pitoli, it's called, it's in Beni, the clinic. It's in Beni Care Clinic, and that's where the healing happens. But also I'm part of Maspepe Network, which is a technical working group for the western parts of KwaZulu-Natal, and the western parts of Durban in KwaZulu-Natal. Also, you can find me on Instagram. I think SLA shared, the advert and the social media, which has been really great. And so my account is at Mbalenhle Matandela, my name, my surname. And then on Twitter, I am at Mbali, MBALI. .matandela, and Mbali is my activist name. Balente is like my writer name. And they're connected as a scholar activist. And so you can find me there.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to everyone who joined. I would say that the final, I think someone asked for the email, it is info@sheleadsafrica.org. And we will also send out an email letting you know a little bit about where you would be able to meet Mba if you did not catch what she said. And Mba, if you are possibly to put in the chat, actually just type out, I think people are asking for your Twitter handle, etc. It would be great if you could please put that in the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. We hope that you found this session to be educational and inspirational. It's of course a topic that could oftentimes, I think, be very heavy, but also being very excited. I think it's always important to feel like you can be the change that you want to see in the world. We also hope that you all will be joining us tomorrow. So tomorrow, the first live stream will be starting at 10 a.m. Throughout the day, we will be having a range of different activities, including discussions on how to take your African fashion startup to the world. We'll also be having fun. I mean, I like to have fun. So we're also going to be having fun dance sessions with various African dance queens from Instagram and other places. So if you're interested in learning about some of the hottest dances from South Africa or from Nigeria, we're definitely going to be having people who will be teaching us. We're also going to be having some content on thinking through how you can manage your finances, definitely during the period that we're in right now. We understand that a lot of people are thinking about how do you better save and how do you better invest. So we will also be having content that will be covering that. We will also be having 3 short films by some amazing African female filmmakers, directors and producers that will be covering a range of different topics. And finally, we're very excited to have additional speakers like Angelique Kidjo, Andrea Maya, covering so many different topics that we hope you'll enjoy. For the live stream, all you will need to do is just go to the She Leads Africa YouTube page. As I mentioned, it will be starting again from 10 a.m. And will be going on throughout the day. So we do very much hope that you'll be able to join us. We thank you so much for coming to join us today. Mbalenhle, we thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, your wisdom, your energy. It was really fantastic to hear from someone like yourself who is living so true to the spirit of activism that we oftentimes see in African women. So I thank you so much for your time. And I thank everybody else for joining us.
Thank you for having me, everyone. I think it's a beautiful conversation. It was blessed. Yeah. Globally Black. It was globally Black.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. All right. Goodbye, everybody.